Hey, it's Tucker again, and in today's video, we're covering the worst Karen deaths ever recorded. From a Karen whose rage-fueled confrontation in a Denver parking garage puts her one reckless step away from the edge, to a Karen whose lifelong habit of arguing with authority leads her to a fatal glass door karma. It was May 2019, Manchester, England, a public parking lot outside a retail complex on a busy Saturday afternoon. There were people moving through the area in both directions. It was the kind of place where small disputes happened and usually came to nothing. Donna Hale was 39. She worked as an administrative assistant and had a pattern of using physical confrontation to settle minor disagreements. She had slapped her ex-husband during an argument. She had done the same to a co-worker and to a family member on separate occasions. None of those incidents had resulted in serious consequences for her. Physical confrontation, in her experience, was something people backed down from. It had always ended there. That afternoon, she had been circling the lot for several minutes looking for a space. When one opened up near the entrance, she moved toward it and began reversing in. A man came from the opposite direction, pulled straight in from the front, and took it before she could complete the turn. He got out of his car, locked it, and walked toward the retail entrance without looking back. Donna got out and went after him. She caught up with him near the entrance and told him directly that she had been waiting for that space and that he had no right to take it. He did not respond. She told him he was not allowed to simply ignore her, that there were cameras in the lot and that she could report what he had done. He turned and tried to walk away. Donna positioned herself in front of him as if she had every right to stop him from leaving. He stopped, said nothing, and waited. Then he tried again. She blocked him a second time. A bystander nearby told her to leave it and let him go. Donna turned to the bystander and told him to mind his own business, that this had nothing to do with him. Then she turned back and kept going. What she did not know was that the man had recently been discharged from a psychiatric unit and was in the middle of adjusting his medication and treatment plan. He was not being passive out of weakness. He was actively working to stay disengaged. He had tried to remove himself from the situation more than once and had not been allowed to. He stood still, said nothing, and kept his reaction contained for as long as he could manage it. On his third attempt to pass her, she slapped him across the face. The slap was the trigger. Whatever regulation he had been maintaining collapsed in that moment. The response came immediately, and it was a single strike, but it landed with a force Donna had not anticipated and had no frame of reference for. She had done this before, and nothing serious had happened. This was not that. She went backward fast, and her head hit the pavement hard. She lost consciousness on impact and did not recover it at the scene. Witnesses moved in immediately. Someone called emergency services and others stayed with Donna until paramedics arrived. She was transported to hospital and admitted directly to intensive care. She was placed on a ventilator. A neurosurgeon performed emergency surgery to relieve the pressure that had built up inside her skull from the impact. The surgery bought time, but it did not change the outcome. Donna did not respond in the days that followed. She remained in a coma. Her family stayed with her. She did not regain consciousness. Donna Hale died from a traumatic brain injury caused by the fall. She was 39 years old. The man remained at the scene after the incident. He did not attempt to leave. He was taken into custody and later charged. Court proceedings included a full psychiatric evaluation. Medical evidence presented during the trial established that his capacity for self-regulation had been significantly compromised at the time of the incident as a direct result of his psychiatric condition and the disruption to his ongoing treatment. The jury accepted the evidence. The charge was reduced to manslaughter. He was not sentenced to a custodial term. A hospital order was imposed requiring him to remain under psychiatric supervision and continue treatment. It was July 15, 2016, when 34-year-old Haley Grant arrived at Maplewood Community Pool in suburban Ohio, armed with her usual arsenal of complaints and barely contained rage. As a middle manager at a local insurance company, Haley had perfected the art of making everyone around her miserable, treating colleagues like incompetent children and neighbors like personal enemies. Her recent divorce had only amplified her bitter personality. Rather than examining her own role in the marriage's failure, Haley blamed everyone else for her mounting legal fees and custody battles. She had become the neighborhood's most feared resident, filing noise complaints over children playing and threatening lawsuits against the homeowners association over trivial infractions like mailbox heights and grass length. The sweltering Saturday afternoon found the community pool packed with families seeking relief from the 90-degree heat. Haley immediately zeroed in on her target, a Hispanic family enjoying the water with their children. Her insurance background had taught her to scrutinize every detail, and she applied this skill to policing who belonged in her community. Marching toward the teenage lifeguard, Haley launched into her familiar routine of demands and threats. She insisted the family be removed, claiming they probably weren't even residents, and threatening to call immigration services. The young lifeguard, barely 18 and earning minimum wage for summer work, tried explaining that all pool users had shown proper identification and paid their fees. But Haley's rage was building to a dangerous crescendo. Her face flushed red as she stormed toward the pool deck, hurling racial slurs at the family while other swimmers watched in horror. Several parents began gathering their children, recognizing the signs of an impending confrontation. The pool's peaceful atmosphere transformed into tense silence as her voice echoed across the water. In her fury, Haley gestured wildly while backing toward the diving area, completely unaware of her surroundings. The wet concrete around pools becomes treacherous when combined with aggressive movement and poor judgment. Her foot slipped on the slick surface, sending her tumbling backward toward the deep end. Witnesses heard a loud crack as Haley's head struck the diving board's metal structure. She hit the water hard and didn't surface. Blood began spreading through the water around her floating body. The teenage lifeguard immediately dove in and pulled her to the pool's edge with help from other swimmers. Haley was unconscious, bleeding from her head, and not breathing. Someone called 911 while others attempted CPR. Paramedics arrived within minutes and worked on her briefly before rushing her to the hospital. She never regained consciousness and was pronounced dead later that evening. The Hispanic family she had targeted stayed to provide statements to police, expressing genuine sadness despite her treatment of them. Security footage confirmed the incident was accidental, though witnesses noted her aggressive behavior had preceded the fall. Her ex-husband declined to speak with reporters about the incident. The community pool installed additional safety features and anti-slip surfaces following the tragedy, but neighbors quietly acknowledged the ironic circumstances. Local news coverage focused primarily on pool safety measures, rather than the confrontation that led to the accident. The woman who spent years trying to exclude others from her community had ultimately excluded herself from life itself through her own reckless hatred and misplaced anger. Her two children, who had witnessed their mother's toxic behavior for years, were left to process not only her sudden death, but the shameful circumstances surrounding it. It was May 4th, 2015. In El Nido, Palawan, the sea lay flat against the limestone cliffs as tourist boats drifted near the mouth of a coastal cave. From the outside, the water looked clear and shallow. Inside, the passage narrowed quickly, and natural light disappeared within a few feet. Vanessa Cruz, 34, had built a modest online following documenting her dive trips around Southeast Asia. She worked as a sales supervisor for an appliance distributor in Manila and spent most of her vacation days traveling to popular dive sites. Over the previous year, she had posted several videos criticizing what she described as overly restrictive dive rules, often arguing that many restrictions existed only to control tourists rather than protect them. Her experience was limited to recreational open water diving, with 42 logged dives. She had no cave certification or training for overhead environments, where divers cannot ascend directly to the surface in an emergency. That morning, a local guide briefed the group beside the cave, marking a turnaround point along the permanent guideline for recreational divers. Beyond it, the passage narrowed into a restriction used only by trained cave divers, where fine silt on the floor could quickly reduce visibility to near zero. Witnesses later said Vanessa repeatedly questioned the restriction during the briefing, arguing that the opening was clearly visible and insisting the warning sounded unnecessary. The guide explained again that the passage was unsafe without cave training and specialized equipment, but she continued pressing the point before the group entered the water shortly afterward. Divers later reported that Vanessa followed the main guideline at first. Visibility was already reduced to a few feet from sediment stirred up by earlier groups. When the team reached the marked boundary, the guide stopped and signaled that recreational divers should turn back. Instead, Vanessa hovered near a narrow side opening that angled upward through the limestone. Witnesses said she gestured toward the passage and moved closer, lingering near the restriction, even as the guide signaled again for her to stay on the main route. Moments later, she turned into the restriction. The opening narrowed immediately. Her fins contacted the bottom, lifting a dense cloud of silt. Within seconds, visibility dropped to zero. Divers waiting near the junction reported seeing the beam of her dive light disappear into the sediment. Inside the chimney, the passage tightened around her tank and shoulders. When she attempted to reposition, the tank valve struck the limestone behind her, preventing a full turn. Her dive computer, recovered later, recorded a sudden increase in breathing rate shortly after she left the guideline. Her tank gauge showed the air supply dropping rapidly over the next several minutes, consistent with heavy breathing under stress. Divers outside the restriction saw silt pushing from the opening, but could not see inside. The guide signaled her repeatedly with his light, but received no response. After several minutes, he escorted the remaining divers toward the entrance and alerted the boat crew that a diver was missing. Local rescue divers arrived and entered the cave along the primary guideline. With visibility near zero, they searched by touch along the rock walls. About 13 feet from the main guideline, rescuers found Vanessa wedged in a narrow vertical restriction. Her tank gauge showed almost no air. She was brought to the surface roughly 40 minutes after the alarm. CPR began on the boat and continued on shore, but she had no pulse. The coroner ruled she drowned after exhausting her air supply. Investigators found no equipment failure. The final report concluded she had left the guideline and entered the restricted passage without cave training, triggering a silt-out and disorientation that prevented her from finding her way back. In the months that followed, local dive operators reinforced the cave boundary markers and required stricter guide supervision for recreational groups entering the site. It was November 11, 2015, when Aaron Lockhart's elitist entitlement would trigger a deadly stampede at a Seattle Whole Foods that would crush her beneath the very people she despised. Aaron, a 44-year-old luxury real estate agent standing 5 feet 7 inches tall with platinum blonde hair, had built her career around exclusivity and looking down on anyone she deemed unworthy. She drove a white Mercedes and carried business cards listing her million-dollar sales to establish superiority over common folk. Aaron specialized in policing who belonged in upscale spaces, having previously gotten families removed from restaurants and demanding stores create premium customer lines. Her Instagram showcased her lifestyle while mocking poor people, accumulating followers who encouraged her classist behavior. That Black Friday morning had been productive for Aaron's superiority complex. She had posted stories ridiculing Target families, demanded a Starbucks barista be fired, and live-streamed herself lecturing a pregnant woman about shopping etiquette. After champagne brunch, Aaron arrived at Whole Foods emboldened by alcohol and social media encouragement. She had boasted about educating peasants about their place, carrying her phone to document confrontations for devoted followers. Aaron's signature tactic involved physically blocking customers she deemed unworthy from accessing premium products while filming encounters. She used her height, designer clothes, and condescending tone to make families feel unwelcome in her territory. When the Rodriguez family approached the last organic turkey, Aaron swooped in like a predator. She began her tirade about being a premium customer while filming the family, particularly targeting the elderly grandmother who moved slowly and spoke limited English. Unable to accept that common people deserved the same products, Aaron physically grabbed the turkey while screaming about organic standards. When Mrs. Rodriguez maintained her grip, Aaron's entitled rage reached dangerous levels. In her fury to wrestle the turkey away while filming, Aaron made aggressive backward movements near the olive oil display. Her designer heels and alcohol-impaired balance made her increasingly erratic, as she refused releasing either turkey or phone. Aaron's violent struggling caused her to fall backward into stacked olive oil bottles, creating a devastating domino effect. Glass exploded as multiple shelving units collapsed, the sound echoing like gunshots. Panicked shoppers, thinking they were under attack, rushed toward exits in a human stampede. Aaron lay trapped beneath fallen shelving and broken glass as terrified customers trampled over her during their desperate escape. The 140-pound agent suffered severe carotid artery lacerations from shattered glass, while sustaining massive skull trauma from falling canned goods. Approximately 15 customers stepped on her body, crushing her ribcage and puncturing her lungs. Erin's final moments were spent clutching the organic turkey she died fighting for, her blood mixing with olive oil on the floor. Her phone continued recording the chaos she created, capturing her own death. Paramedics found Erin in cardiac arrest with massive blood loss. 20 minutes of resuscitation failed as she had lost too much blood from her severed artery. Security footage showing Erin's entitled behavior causing the stampede went viral. Online reactions were brutal, with comments flooding social media mocking her death over groceries. 3 customers required hospitalization for stampede injuries. The Rodriguez family received death threats from Erin's followers until accounts were deactivated, requiring police protection. Whole Foods implemented crowd control measures and reinforced shelving. Erin's firm discovered her history of discriminating against clients, leading to investigations and her name being removed from properties. Erin Lockhart's death became a cautionary tale about how classist entitlement can have deadly consequences. It was July 22, 2018, Calgary, Alberta, Canada. A public zoo on a warm summer afternoon. Families moved along the paths in both directions. The black bear enclosure sat along one of the main routes, fenced, signed, and built to keep a fixed distance between visitors and the animal inside. Cheryl Mason was 47. She worked as an office administrator and had spent the better part of the previous months buried in work that had ground her down. This trip was the first real break she had taken in a while. She trusted her own judgment and liked to feel in control of things. She had read before coming that American black bears were shy and non-confrontational, and had taken that to mean they were safe at close range if you stayed calm. A friend had told her that zoo animals were kept hungrier than they needed to be, and that the feeding rules were more about liability than actual risk. That stuck with her. When she reached the black bear enclosure, the animal was moving along the fence line in a loose pattern. She watched it for a moment and decided it was hungry. The way it was moving, coming toward the fence, it looked to her like something was looking for food. She opened her bag, took out a granola bar, and broke off a piece. The signs on the fence were right there. No feeding, no reaching through the barrier. She had seen them and kept walking toward the fence anyway. There was a corner seam where 2 fence panels met at a slight angle. The gap at that point was a little wider than the rest of the enclosure. Not broken, not a safety failure, just slightly wider than the panels on either side. Wide enough. She positioned herself there, leaned forward, and pushed her hand through the gap with the piece of granola bar held out toward the bear. The bear had already been drifting toward that section of the fence as she approached, tracking the food in her hand. 2 staff members saw it happen at the same time from different spots along the path. Both started moving toward her immediately. One of them called out for her to stop. Cheryl turned toward the voice with clear irritation on her face. She told him to relax, that it was just a small piece, and that the bear was clearly hungry. The staff member repeated the instruction, louder this time. Cheryl did not move her arm. She said she was not hurting anything and that they did not need to make a scene. She stayed leaned forward with her hand still through the gap while she was saying it, as though the conversation and the feeding were 2 separate things she could handle at the same time. She was still holding the granola out when the bear reached through. The grip on her hand and lower arm was immediate. The force behind it was not something she could pull against from where she was standing, already leaned forward with her weight toward the fence and nothing to brace from. The bear tore through the soft tissue of her hand and forearm before it released, and staff reached her. They got to her within seconds and pressed down on the arm and tried to keep her stable while someone called emergency services. There was a lot of blood. Other visitors nearby had stopped and were not moving. Cheryl was taken to hospital. The injuries to her hand and forearm were severe. The damage to the blood vessels and surrounding tissue was too extensive. She did not make it. Cheryl Mason died in hospital from the injuries she sustained at the enclosure fence. She was 47 years old. The investigation afterward confirmed the feeding signs had been clearly posted and visible. Cheryl had gone to the wider gap at the corner seam and pushed her hand through in direct violation of the posted rules. Staff had called out a warning, and she had responded without pulling her arm back, staying in position at the gap long enough for the bear to make contact. No fault was found with the animal or the enclosure design. The zoo modified the corner seam spacing across its enclosures after the incident, so that the wider gap at panel joins no longer existed. It was February 11, 2018, in Columbus, Ohio. and the temperature had fallen to 14 degrees Fahrenheit overnight. A prolonged cold snap forced furnaces across the city to run almost continuously, placing extra strain on aging heating systems. Inside a modest single-story home on Millbrook Drive, the air felt warm but heavy, the windows closed tightly against the winter wind. Sharon Kimball, 61, had lived in the house for more than 2 decades and prided herself on handling maintenance without outside help. She had recently scaled back from full-time office work and spent most mornings at home. A gas furnace and water heater operated from a small utility room off the hallway, where a combination smoke and carbon monoxide detector had been installed 2 years earlier. During the week leading up to the incident, the detector alarmed multiple times. Each alert irritated her further, and she convinced herself the device was overly sensitive rather than signaling a real problem. After the third alarm sounded late on February 10th, she removed the unit from the wall, unplugged it, and placed it in a kitchen drawer before returning to bed. By mid-morning the next day, the furnace cycled repeatedly as outdoor temperatures remained low. A hairline crack inside the heat exchanger, later identified during inspection, allowed combustion gases to mix with the heated air circulating through the house. Without the detector active, carbon monoxide accumulated gradually. Sharon moved between the kitchen and living room, tidying paperwork and preparing coffee. Unaware that the gas was building to dangerous levels, she began to feel fatigued and slightly dizzy, symptoms that progressed slowly enough to seem like ordinary exhaustion. As the furnace continued running, her coordination worsened. She sat on the couch, leaning back as the room grew quiet except for the steady hum of the heating system. Around 9 a.m., her daughter called but received no answer. Inside the house, Sharon attempted to stand but lost balance, lowering herself back onto the cushions. The exposure intensified, reducing oxygen delivery to her brain. By late morning, she was no longer able to respond to phone calls or movement around her. When her daughter arrived shortly after 11 a.m. and entered with a spare key, she found the living room unusually still and Sharon unconscious on the couch. Emergency services were contacted immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began oxygen therapy while ventilating the home. Hospital testing later revealed severely elevated carboxyhemoglobin levels, confirming prolonged carbon monoxide exposure. Despite aggressive treatment, the damage from oxygen deprivation proved irreversible. Sharon remained in critical condition for 2 days before dying on February 13th. Post-incident inspection confirmed the cracked heat exchanger as the source of the leak and verified that the earlier alarms had been responding to genuine low-level exposure. Local safety officials used the case during winter outreach campaigns to emphasize annual furnace inspections and the importance of keeping carbon monoxide detectors active, especially during extended cold weather when heating systems operate under constant strain. It was August 9th, 2016. At a coastal zoo in Monterey, California, on a busy summer afternoon when the walrus exhibit stayed packed with visitors leaning along the rail, holding up phones as the animal surfaced and sank in slow cycles, while posted rules about distance and barriers were visible every few yards, but routinely ignored. Laura Whitcomb was 42 and worked as a regional sales coordinator, a job that kept her traveling and constantly documenting trips and outings. People who knew her described her as forceful and argumentative, especially in public places, where she often challenged staff and treated posted rules as negotiable rather than fixed. She was visiting the zoo with a coworker and focused on getting a close selfie with the walrus, not a zoomed photo and not one taken from behind the barrier. She followed travel pages that praised risky behavior and had no experience with large animals, yet regularly dismissed safety rules as exaggerated or designed mainly to reduce liability. The walrus enclosure used a low, inward-sloped concrete barrier that separated visitors from a deep saltwater pool. Multiple signs warned against leaning, climbing, or reaching over the edge, and staff presence was higher during feeding windows because the animals were more active. A keeper had just finished reminding people to step back when Laura stopped and began arguing. She accused staff of overreacting, pointed to other visitors near the rail, and claimed the walrus was trained and harmless. She raised her phone and started recording, saying the rules were only for appearance, and when the warning was repeated, she climbed onto the barrier ledge to frame herself with the animal in the background. The concrete surface was wet from splashback. Laura leaned forward, holding her phone down toward the water, as the walrus surfaced nearby, while waving her free hand to get its attention. Her weight shifted past the balance point of the barrier. Staff shouted for her to move back, and several people stepped away. The walrus surged upward suddenly, forcing water over the edge. Witnesses saw its body rise and felt the splash as a flipper struck Laura's forearm, knocking her off balance. Her phone flew out of her hand, her upper body tipped forward, and she went over the barrier headfirst into the pool. The animal reacted immediately to the unexpected entry. In the churned water, it made contact again, gripping her upper arm and shoulder with its mouth and pulling her several feet away from the edge as it submerged. Laura surfaced briefly, gasping, but was dragged under again as the walrus rolled. Water entered her airway while her legs kicked unevenly and then slowed. Underwater, her head struck the sloped concrete wall, and bubbles rose in a short burst before thinning. The walrus released her and moved toward deeper water, as alarms sounded throughout the exhibit. Emergency services were called right away. Staff used poles and flotation devices, but could not enter the pool until the animal cleared the area, which took nearly 2 minutes. When Laura was pulled out, she was unresponsive, with pale blue skin and water draining from her mouth and nose. CPR began on the deck within moments. Paramedics arrived 8 minutes after the call and continued resuscitation while transporting her, but she never regained a pulse. The medical examiner listed drowning as the primary cause of death, with blunt force injuries to the head and shoulder from striking the enclosure wall as contributing factors, meaning she inhaled water after being pulled under and injured during the struggle. Security footage confirmed the argument. The climb, the fall, and the delay caused by the animal's movement, and the zoo later raised the barrier height and added fixed standoff rails. It was July 9, 2018. The Seine drifted under a pale evening sky as tour boats passed beneath the stone bridges of central Paris. On one vessel's open upper deck, passengers shifted in their seats while a crew member repeated a routine warning. The next bridge had low clearance and everyone needed to remain seated. Near the front rail stood Regina Clark, 60, visiting from Surrey, England. She ran a small retirement lifestyle page aimed mostly at women her age. Travel photos, restaurant reviews, and short posts about staying active after 60. The account produced a modest stream of advertising income that supplemented her pension, and the Paris trip had been planned around a week of scheduled content she intended to post in real time. Before retirement, Regina had spent 3 decades as a regional furniture sales manager. Former colleagues described her as organized and persistent, but also someone who rarely accepted being corrected once she had made up her mind. She had chronic neck stiffness from cervical arthritis and attended physiotherapy twice a month, but she often brushed off medical advice and insisted she refused to slow down for age. The evening river cruise was meant to produce simple photos for her page. The lower deck was enclosed and crowded, so Regina moved to the open upper level for a clearer skyline view. Several bridges along the route passed close enough that passengers were required to remain seated below the height of the metal rail. As the boat approached one of the narrower arches, a deckhand walked down the aisle repeating the same warning he had already given earlier in the trip. Everyone needed to sit or lean down until the boat cleared the bridge. Several passengers later recalled Regina remaining at the rail with her phone raised, angling it toward the approaching arch. When the crew member asked her to sit, witnesses said she waved him off and continued recording, insisting she only needed a quick photo. The deckhand pointed again toward the bridge and repeated that the clearance was low. Instead of sitting, Regina stepped onto a fixed wooden bench, lifting herself higher above the rail to frame the shot. Passengers seated nearby later said she continued speaking loudly, complaining that the crew was overreacting and that she had done similar photos on other trips without problems. As the vessel approached Pont de l'Alma, the captain reduced speed to about 6 knots, normal for that section of the river. Most people on the upper deck leaned forward or lowered their heads as the stone arch filled the frame ahead. Regina remained standing on the bench. Images later recovered from her phone showed she was still taking photos as the boat entered the bridge. The clearance above the bench was too low. Passengers heard an impact as her head struck the underside of the arch, knocking her off balance. She fell backward onto the wooden deck and her phone slid across the floor toward a drainage seam. A passenger pressed the emergency call button at 8:17 p.m. Crew reached Regina within seconds and found her unresponsive. The captain stopped the boat and contacted river authorities. A river patrol unit arrived about 8 minutes later and transferred her to the quay, where paramedics attempted resuscitation, but she was pronounced dead. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death fatal cervical trauma from the overhead impact. Investigators confirmed the vessel had slowed and that crew warnings had been issued before the bridge. Most passengers were seated. Authorities concluded Regina had stood above the safe clearance level despite instructions. After the incident, the operator installed larger warning signs and additional barriers on the upper deck. It was July 4, 2019, when Natalia Brooks' obsession with neighborhood control would send her drowning to the bottom of a Miami pool during what should have been a patriotic celebration. Natalia, a 39-year-old homeowners association president, standing 5 feet 3 inches tall, had transformed her HOA position into a personal dictatorship. She drove a white golf cart equipped with cameras and citation books, patrolling the neighborhood like a military commander, enforcing martial law on suburban families. Natalia's Facebook group, Violation Reporting, had over 200 members who encouraged her surveillance tactics. She had installed security cameras to monitor neighbors and was notorious for filming residents during private moments, posting footage online with rants about property values. That Independence Day morning had been productive for Natalia's authoritarian agenda. She had issued citations for excessive patriotic decorations, filmed families for noise violations involving children playing, and posted Facebook rants about inconsiderate neighbors destroying property values. After consuming wine while patrolling, Natalia spotted cars at the Johnson family's pool party. Her alcohol-fueled authority kicked into overdrive as she began filming while screaming about unauthorized gatherings and parking violations. Natalia's signature tactic involved walking backward while maintaining aggressive eye contact during confrontations, a psychological dominance play perfected through years of neighborhood harassment. This move had intimidated dozens of residents into submission. Arriving at the pool party in business attire with her clipboard, Natalia crashed through the gate, screaming about illegal gatherings while filming terrified children and families trying to enjoy their holiday. Unable to contain her HOA authority complex, Natalia began confronting guests about parking. She walked backward along the pool's edge to maintain her intimidating stare while screaming about running the neighborhood and demanding respect. To establish maximum dominance, Natalia stepped onto the decorative stone coping surrounding the pool. The stones had become slippery from splashing water, but Natalia was too focused on her power performance to notice the dangerous surface. As Natalia gestured wildly with her clipboard while walking backward, her business heels lost traction on the wet stone. Her 130-pound frame tumbled backward into the 8-foot deep end, still wearing her heavy business suit and leather shoes. The waterlogged clothing immediately dragged Natalia downward as she thrashed frantically. Her clipboard floated beside her as she struggled desperately, unable to swim and weighed down by her authority costume that became a death trap. Party guests initially thought Natalia was staging another dramatic confrontation. By the time they realized the situation was genuine, she had been underwater for over 3 minutes. Natalia suffered drowning-induced cardiac arrest as pool water filled her lungs. Her final moments were spent clawing at the water while her clipboard sank beside her, the symbol of her tyranny becoming waterlogged evidence. Emergency responders arrived within 8 minutes, but Natalia was dead at the pool bottom. Her body was recovered, still clutching HOA violation forms, the papers she used to terrorize neighbors now dissolved into illegible pulp. The community's reaction was notably unsympathetic, with neighbors privately expressing relief. The Johnson family faced no consequences as the party was within the ordinances and Natalia had been trespassing. Natalia's HOA position was dissolved, and the neighborhood association was restructured to prevent future harassment. Her Facebook group was deactivated after members began celebrating her death. The incident led to statewide HOA reforms limiting president's authority. Natalia Brooks's death became a cautionary tale about how power-hungry behavior can literally drag you under. It was June 18, 2017, Perth, Western Australia, a residential home in a quiet suburb. The kind of house that looked exactly the way an interior designer would want it to look. Clean lines, good furniture, everything considered. Melissa's husband was due back that evening for his birthday and the house was ready for it. Almost. Melissa Grant was 39. She worked as an interior designer and had spent years developing a sharp eye for how things should look, and an equally sharp opinion about people who did not meet her standard. She had a particular dislike for being charged a premium by someone she felt was overstating the difficulty of a job. When a sparking wall outlet showed up that morning, she called an electrician. He came out, looked at the outlet, and gave her the price. She looked at him and told him directly that she had been in the design industry for 15 years, had managed entire renovation projects, and was not going to pay that figure for a job that any person with a basic set of hands could complete in under half an hour. She told him she hoped his next client was less informed. He did not argue. He picked up his bag and left. She closed the door and went to find her phone. She watched 2 videos. The first one walked through the correct process. Turn off the breaker, test the circuit, confirm no live current before touching anything. It was clear and thorough, and it made the job look like it required more steps than she had time for. The second video was shorter. The person in it went straight to the faceplate, pulled it off, and worked quickly without any of the preliminary checks. That was the version she needed. She noticed the setup in the second video was not identical to hers, but decided that was a cosmetic difference and not something that changed the fundamentals. The extra steps in the first video felt unnecessary for what she saw as a simple job. She had just sent away a qualified electrician, so she chose the second video. She did not go to the breaker box. She turned off the wall switch and moved on. She had watched someone do this without isolating the breaker, and it had looked fine. She removed the faceplate and exposed the wiring. Everything looked manageable. She worked through the steps with confidence, handling the wiring the way the second video had shown. At some point, she registered that what she was looking at did not match the video. The layout was different in a way she could not immediately account for. She paused on it, then decided it did not matter enough to stop. Her husband was due home in a few hours. The wall switch she had turned off controlled the outlet's function. It did not isolate the circuit. The wiring behind the faceplate was live. When she made contact with the live conductor, the current passed through her. The current caused her muscles to lock and her hand did not pull back. The current kept moving through her and she had no way to break free of it. Her heart lost its rhythm and could not find it again. Her husband arrived home to find the house quiet and the lights on. He called out for her and got no answer. He found her on the floor near the outlet, the faceplate still removed and the wiring exposed beside her. She was not responsive. He called emergency services immediately. Paramedics arrived and worked on her at the scene, but she had been there for some time before he found her, and there was nothing that could be done. Melissa Grant was pronounced dead at the scene. The cause of death was cardiac arrest caused by electrocution. The review confirmed the breaker had not been switched off at any point. The wall switch had been turned off, but that does not isolate the circuit, and the wiring had been live throughout. Investigators noted she had registered a visible inconsistency during the repair, and continued anyway. The electrician she had turned away was contacted during the review. His quote had been standard for the work involved. It was July 18, 2015 in Waukegan, Illinois. Conditions on Lake Michigan were beginning to shift, with steady winds building across the open water and whitecaps forming farther offshore. Deborah Pruitt was 39 years old and lived in Waukegan, where she worked as a property manager for a residential apartment company. Colleagues described her as confident handling disputes with tenants and vendors, often preferring direct confrontation when she believed rules were being applied unfairly. She owned a 19-foot fiberglass motorboat that she kept at a slip in Waukegan Harbor and frequently described herself as an experienced boater. That morning, Deborah arrived at the marina with her younger sister, Michelle, and a neighbor, planning an afternoon on the lake. A small craft advisory scheduled for noon warned of 22 miles per hour winds, gusts up to 35, and waves between 4 and 6 feet, posted through harbor alerts and NOAA weather radio. A marina staff member mentioned the advisory as Deborah prepared to untie the lines and suggested postponing the trip. Deborah responded sharply, insisting she had far more boating experience than the staff member. She claimed advisories were exaggerated to reduce liability and accused the marina of trying to discourage them from launching. When he suggested they wear life jackets, she dismissed the advice and untied the lines despite the warning. They launched at 11:45 and headed north from the harbor. As winds increased sooner than forecast, conditions worsened and the boat struggled to maintain course in the growing chop, pitching heavily but not taking on water. At approximately 12:30, they decided to turn back toward shore. During the turn, the boat was exposed broadside to larger wave sets. For several minutes, waves struck the vessel from the starboard side. A larger wave struck at an angle while the boat still carried a slight list from the maneuver. The combined force rolled the vessel, and it capsized. All three were thrown into the water, where temperatures measured about 61 degrees Fahrenheit. None were wearing life jackets, and Deborah struggled to stay afloat. Michelle and the neighbor attempted to support her near the overturned hull as waves continued breaking against the capsized boat. A passing recreational vessel spotted the capsized boat at approximately 12:40 and radioed the Coast Guard. The reporting vessel remained nearby and attempted recovery, but was only able to safely pull 2 of the occupants aboard due to the wave height and instability near the overturned hull. The Coast Guard launched from the station at Waukegan Harbor and arrived on scene within approximately 20 minutes of the distress call. Rescue personnel first recovered Michelle and the neighbor from the water, both conscious but showing signs of hypothermia. Deborah Pruitt was not immediately visible. After several minutes of searching the area around the overturned hull, responders located her submerged a short distance away. She was brought aboard unresponsive. CPR was initiated immediately. Deborah was transported to shore, where paramedics continued resuscitation efforts for over 30 minutes without response. She was pronounced dead at 2:11 in the afternoon. The coroner listed the cause of death as drowning, with hypothermia as a contributing factor. The Coast Guard cited the absence of life jackets and later coordinated a public awareness campaign with marine safety agencies. After the incident, local marine authorities reinforced life jacket compliance requirements for recreational boaters. Safety patrols increased random checks, and citations were issued to operators and passengers found underway without properly accessible Coast Guard-approved personal flotation devices. It was September 7, 2017, in Sedona, Arizona, at a crowded Red Rock overlook where clear skies and calm weather drew steady foot traffic throughout the day. The view appeared stable and inviting, but erosion beneath the surface had weakened the edge, leaving little margin for error near the steep drop. Dana Pike was 28 and worked as a hairstylist at a mid-range salon outside Phoenix. She was reliable with clients, steady with coloring work, and focused on moving into a better shop. She used social media to support that goal, filming short travel videos meant to show confidence and polish. Nothing was sponsored, but she treated visibility as professional leverage. She planned the Sedona trip around filming. Dana preferred shots taken close to open space, where the background looked wide and uninterrupted. Friends said she disliked being hurried and often held her position once she set up. She carried a small tripod, a phone with a wide-angle lens, and wore smooth-soled sneakers. She had no training in climbing or rock stability, and assumed that a popular overlook was safe because it was frequently used. That afternoon, hikers moved in and out of the overlook, taking turns at the front edge. Dana set her tripod near the front and began recording. People behind her asked to pass. She waved them off and continued filming, speaking toward the phone while holding her spot. A small sign and a line of rocks marked where visitors were advised to stop. She stepped beyond that line to widen the frame. The surface looked level, but the rock was fractured sandstone shaped by erosion. Shallow cracks were visible on top, with larger voids underneath. The area had been flagged informally by rangers but remained open. Dana adjusted her stance, turned her upper body toward the camera, and placed her right heel close to a thin seam in the rock. The first break was minor. A sharp crack was heard as a small piece of stone snapped loose, and her heel dropped slightly. She reacted by spreading her arms and shifting her weight outward. The crack widened immediately. A larger section of rock tilted forward, scraping as it began to slide. The slab detached completely. Dana fell with it, dropping roughly 200 feet down a steep field of loose rock. Her shoulder struck first, twisting her body. Her head hit next, followed by her chest. She continued to tumble, striking jagged stone multiple times before stopping against a cluster of boulders below. Dana's tripod remained standing near the boundary. Her phone was recovered nearby, still recording, capturing the cracking sound, a sudden rush of air, and the image spinning upward before stopping. Emergency services were called immediately, but access was limited by terrain. Ranger teams reached the area on foot first, followed by paramedics. Dana showed no signs of life when responders arrived, and death was pronounced at the scene. The coroner reported multiple blunt force injuries. Her skull was fractured with severe brain damage. Several ribs were broken, both lungs had collapsed, and there was extensive internal bleeding. The cause of death was massive trauma from a fall from height, with injuries that would have been fatal within minutes. The incident was confirmed through witness accounts, phone footage, and the displaced rock slab, which had broken cleanly from the edge. That section of the overlook was closed the same day. At the salon where Dana worked, co-workers placed an empty chair with her scissors and combs on the seat. Rangers later added clearer warnings and used the incident in safety briefings to explain how erosion can cause sudden failure, even in heavily visited areas. It was November 2nd, 2014. In Columbus, Ohio, the air was damp and cool after a light afternoon rain. Streetlights reflected off wet pavement along High Street. Evening commuters moved in steady lines as buses stopped and pulled away along the curb. Earlier that evening, Charmaine Bell, 56, boarded a northbound city bus after finishing a small paid workshop at a rented community room. She ran a modest social media page built around filming confrontations in public places. Her videos focused on catching strangers violating rules and pushing them into arguments on camera. The audience was small, but she posted often and treated each clip like proof she was in charge. Before that, she had spent nearly 20 years as an administrative assistant. 2 years earlier, she left the job and poured her energy into the page. Friends said she planned confrontations like meetings, notes on her phone, rehearsed lines, quick searches of local policies. She was taking a prescribed blood thinner after a clot the year before. The bus was crowded with commuters. Near the front, a man in his 20s sat in a clearly marked priority seat, reserved for seniors and riders with disabilities. Charmaine spotted the sign immediately. Passengers later said she raised her phone and started recording before speaking. She stepped into the aisle, pointed at the sign, and held the phone toward his face. Her voice carried, sharp and escalating, as she continued confronting him while recording as he tried to look away. The driver announced the next stop, East North Broadway, while the argument continued. Other riders watched without stepping in. Shortly after 8 p.m., the doors opened. The man stepped onto the wet sidewalk. Charmaine followed, still filming. Outside, he tried to keep walking toward the crosswalk. Charmaine moved in front of him and continued confronting him while filming. Witnesses described her blocking his path and refusing to let the exchange end. When he tried to step around her, she grabbed the strap of his backpack to stop him. The man reacted instinctively. He twisted his shoulder to pull free and stepped away. He did not hit her, but the sudden yank shifted her weight backward. Rainwater had collected along the curb in a shallow strip. A yellow folding caution sign stood nearby, but it covered only part of the slick area. Charmaine wore narrow 3.5-inch spike heels. As she stepped back, her right heel slid sideways on the damp concrete. Her left foot didn't catch. Witnesses later told police she seemed more focused on keeping her phone up than on her footing. She tipped straight backward. The back of her head struck the curb edge. Her phone skidded across the pavement and stopped near the gutter. For a moment, she rolled to her side and pushed herself up, brushing at her coat as if embarrassed. A dark patch began spreading through her hair. She swayed and tried to steady herself. A man at the stop asked if she was all right. She waved him off, took 2 unsteady steps, then her knees buckled. She collapsed again, this time unresponsive. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived about 9 minutes later and transported her to the hospital. Scans revealed a skull fracture and a large subdural hematoma. Blood thinners prevented normal clotting, allowing the bleeding to expand rapidly. Surgeons performed emergency surgery, but her condition worsened overnight, and she died the next morning. The coroner ruled the death accidental blunt head trauma. Police determined the man's movement was a reflex after she grabbed his backpack, and no charges were filed. Transit officials later reminded riders that disputes over priority seating should be reported to drivers rather than handled by passengers directly. It was June 22, 2016, when Whitney Collins's obsession with authority and viral fame would crush her to death at a Phoenix McDonald's drive-thru. Whitney, a 35-year-old middle school vice principal standing 5 feet 5 inches tall, had built her identity around wielding power over teenagers and service workers. Her red Honda Civic was equipped with phone mounts for filming confrontations, and she carried laminated credentials to intimidate anyone who questioned her authority. Whitney's vice principal Karen TikTok account boasted 8,000 followers who consumed her daily content of berating fast food workers and retail employees. She had perfected using her educational position as a weapon, constantly reminding people that she dealt with lying teenagers and knew insubordination. That Tuesday morning had been productive for Whitney's content creation. She had suspended 3 students for attitude problems, filmed herself screaming at a parent who questioned her methods, and posted about teaching respect to the next generation and their enabling parents. Whitney was infamous at this burger joint's location, having previously gotten 2 teenage employees fired by filming them and demanding corporate action. Her signature move involved exiting her vehicle during drive-thru disputes to intimidate young workers while live streaming. When 17-year-old employee Jake Martinez informed Whitney that the ice cream machine was broken, she launched into her tirade about being a school administrator who dealt with lying teenagers daily. Her followers commented encouragement as she began her escalation routine. Unable to contain her need for dramatic content, Whitney exited her Honda Civic while leaving it in drive, live streaming as she approached the menu board. She began pounding on the structure while screaming about incompetence and threatening to shut down the establishment. To intimidate Jake and capture better footage, Whitney began violently shaking the 200-pound electronic menu board support pole. The structure had been loosened by Arizona windstorms, but Whitney was too focused on her performance to notice the dangerous swaying. The menu board couldn't withstand Whitney's assault and began toppling toward her as she continued filming. In her final moments, she was screaming blame at Jake when the metal structure struck her across the back with devastating force. Whitney was crushed between the falling menu board and her slowly rolling Honda Civic. Her spine snapped instantly while her ribcage collapsed under the weight. Internal organs ruptured as 200 pounds of metal compressed her 125-pound frame against the bumper. Her phone captured every horrific second as she was pinned and crushed. The footage showed her final accusatory stare at Jake, still trying to blame the teenager as her life ended. Jake Martinez quit immediately and required therapy for survivor's guilt, haunted by Whitney's final moments of blaming him. The school district investigated Whitney's conduct, revealing inappropriate interactions with students and parents documented on social media. Whitney Collins' death became the ultimate cautionary tale about Karen culture and deadly consequences of entitled behavior, proving viral fame isn't worth dying for. It was August 14, 2017. Birmingham, United Kingdom. A commercial car wash on a busy road on the south side of the city. You pull in, the machine takes over, and you sit still until it is done. That is how it works. Conveyor track, high-pressure jets, brushes, and big industrial dryers bolted at the end of the bay, at the height of someone sitting inside a car. Claire Hargreaves was 42. She owned a boutique in Birmingham and had built it up over years into something she was proud of. She liked things done her way, the shop, the staff, the details. She did not like being told what to do by people she felt were below her level, and she did not hide that well. That morning she had run into a woman she used to know. The woman had married into money, and it showed. Nice car, nice clothes, easy manner. Claire left the coffee shop smiling and furious, and the mood stayed with her all day. She got to the car wash in the early afternoon. The attendant had been working there for 11 years. Before she pulled in, he told her what he told everyone. Windows all the way up. Sit still. Hands inside. Do not touch anything once the cycle starts. Claire nodded and pulled forward with her driver's side window still open. She knew it was open. It was not an accident. She had looked at it and decided it was fine. She ran a business. She had dealt with harder problems than a little water coming into her car. The gap was small. The man in the vest was not someone she needed to take seriously. It was going to be fine. The rinse started and a thin line of water came in through the gap and ran down the door. Claire looked at it and left the window where it was. Fine. The conveyor moved her forward and the jets came on. The high-pressure jets were not fine. The spray hit the open window directly, and water came through hard and fast. It soaked the door, the seat next to her, the controls on the inside of the door. It was loud and cold and completely different from what she had told herself it would be. She reached for the window switch, but water was already running down her arm and across the panel. She hit the switch late and it did not respond the way she needed it to. The water kept coming. She decided that trying from inside was not working and pushed her head and shoulders out through the window opening, one arm against the outer door, trying to reach and adjust it from the outside as water kept pouring in. The conveyor kept moving. There was no way to stop it or slow it down from where she was. It moved the car forward at the same speed it had been moving the whole time. The dryers at the end of the bay were big metal units bolted to the frame. They did not move, and they had no way of knowing anything was wrong. They were set at the height of a person sitting inside a car, because that is all they were built to deal with. Claire's head and shoulders were outside the car when the conveyor pulled her into that section. The edge of the housing caught her across the head and forced her sideways. The car kept moving into the fixed structure, with her body caught between the outer door frame and the dryer unit. It did not stop until the automatic trigger at the end of the bay cut the conveyor. By the time the car came to rest, Claire was partially outside the vehicle and unresponsive. The attendant reached her within seconds. She was breathing but not responding to his voice. She said something fragmented that he could not make out. Emergency services were contacted immediately. She lost consciousness before paramedics arrived and did not regain it. Claire Hargreaves was pronounced dead at the scene. She was 42 years old. She died from severe head and upper body injuries from the collision with the dryer housing while her upper body was outside the car. The investigation did not take long. The window had been open against clear instructions. The machine had done exactly what it was supposed to do. Claire had pushed herself outside the vehicle while it was still moving through an active cycle, and the system had no way to know that or stop for it. After the incident, the facility added a window check to its entry process. No car would go in until a staff member had looked at every window and confirmed it was fully closed. It was October 4th, 2016, in Estes Park, Colorado. The sky over a mountain park meadow was clear and cool in the late afternoon light. The aspen trees along the eastern meadows had turned a full yellow. Fall season was in full swing, drawing visitors who lined the meadow edges to witness the annual rut. Diane Kowalski was 52 years old and lived in Aurora, Colorado. She had driven to the park that afternoon with her adult son to see the elk. She worked as a homeowners association coordinator and, according to her son, was accustomed to being the one who set the rules rather than followed them. She had visited the park once before and told nearby visitors she understood elk behavior and believed the safety barriers were excessive. She carried a digital camera with a zoom lens, but felt the posted viewing distance did not allow for the photos she wanted. At the center of the meadow, a bull elk weighing approximately 720 pounds stood among several cows. The bull had been bugling for over an hour, asserting dominance over the herd. Rangers had posted bright orange signs at trailheads and meadow entrances reading, "Elk rutting season. Stay 75 feet from all wildlife. Bull elk are dangerous." Rope barriers marked the safe viewing boundary. A ranger was stationed at the north end of the meadow and had already redirected several visitors that evening. At 5:40 in the afternoon, Diane stepped over the rope barrier to get closer shots of the bull and the cows. Her son called after her and told her to come back. She waved him off and walked toward the herd with her camera raised, closing the distance to roughly 30 feet from the nearest cow. Several nearby visitors verbally warned her that she was too close, but she ignored their warnings. Diane paused briefly to take multiple photographs, repositioning slightly to improve her angle. The bull, which had been facing slightly away, turned and fixed on her movement. His head lowered, his antlers angled forward. Within seconds, his steady walk accelerated into a charge. Diane turned and ran, but she had covered less than 15 feet when the bull caught up to her. He struck her from behind with his chest and antlers, knocking her forcefully to the ground. The impact forced the air from her lungs. He stepped on her before pivoting back toward the herd. The entire encounter lasted less than 10 seconds. The ranger stationed nearby had already begun moving when he saw her cross the barrier, but he was too far away to intervene before the charge occurred. Bystanders backed away as he reached her and radioed for emergency response. Paramedics arrived at 6:04 p.m. Diane had sustained a puncture wound to her lower back. 2 fractured vertebrae, a collapsed lung, and significant blunt force trauma to her hip and leg. She was stabilized at the scene and airlifted to a medical center, where she underwent emergency surgery that evening. Despite intervention, she developed complications from internal bleeding and did not survive. She was pronounced dead the following morning, October 5th. After the incident, rangers reinforced existing wildlife distance messaging and reminded visitors that bull elk during rut season are territorial and can charge without prolonged warning. It was February 3rd, 2016, on a narrow residential access road in Phoenix, Arizona, where older homes backed onto a strip of cracked asphalt used by cars and motorcycles as a shortcut between 2 busier streets. The road carried steady evening traffic, and engine noise echoed between walls and fences as drivers passed through. Erin Voss was 33 and lived in one of the corner properties bordering the road. For months, she had complained about traffic noise, arguing that the road cut too close to her property line and was being used improperly. She believed the city had failed to enforce boundaries and that drivers were trespassing through what she considered part of her land. That evening, after another surge of cars and motorcycles passed through, Erin stepped into the roadway and began shouting at a driver who slowed near her driveway. She accused the driver of illegally using the road and claimed it was private property. The argument drew attention from nearby homes, and Erin raised her phone to record, positioning herself directly in the center of the lane to block traffic. The driver stopped several feet away and argued back through the open window, pointing out that the road was marked as public access. Erin refused to move and continued filming, pacing in front of the car and gesturing at the pavement. She insisted the noise was unbearable and said she had had enough, declaring that no vehicles would pass. As the confrontation continued, Erin lowered herself onto the asphalt, first sitting cross-legged, then lying flat on her back across the center of the road. She positioned her phone on her chest, still recording, and spread her arms slightly outward as if to force drivers to stop. The stopped car remained in place, its headlights angled slightly away due to the road's curve. At the same time, another vehicle approached from behind the curve at low speed. The road lighting was uneven, and Erin's dark clothing blended with the asphalt. The approaching driver did not see her body in the roadway until the headlight swept fully into the straightaway. The driver braked hard, but the distance was too short. The front bumper struck Erin's legs first, knocking her backward. The car rolled over her lower body and torso before coming to a stop several feet ahead. The impact forced the air from her lungs and pinned her briefly beneath the undercarriage. Neighbors ran toward the scene as the driver exited the vehicle in shock. Erin was unresponsive, with visible injuries to her legs and abdomen, and blood pooling beneath her. Emergency services were called immediately. Paramedics arrived within minutes and found extensive blunt force trauma. Erin was transported to the hospital but was pronounced dead shortly after arrival. The medical examiner later reported massive internal injuries, including a crushed pelvis, ruptured organs, and severe internal bleeding, explaining that the force of the vehicle caused injuries incompatible with survival. The death was ruled accidental, resulting from blunt force trauma sustained after lying in an active roadway. Afterward, the city reviewed the road designation and installed additional signage and reflective markers. The incident was cited in neighborhood meetings as a warning about road rage escalation and the danger of blocking live traffic to prove a point. It was January 21, 2013. At a shopping mall in Charlotte, North Carolina, the central fountain sat drained and surrounded by yellow caution tape. Most shoppers ignored it. Inside the basin, a temporary circulation pump rested near the wall, plugged into a nearby outlet while bright orange signs warned that electrical maintenance was underway. Genevieve Moore, 49, stood near the barrier studying the space. She ran a small fashion page from her townhouse in Huntersville and worked part-time at a cosmetics counter inside the mall. Her audience was modest, but she treated every post like a professional shoot, often staging photos in public spaces to make them appear exclusive. Mall management had already warned her twice about filming without permission. Co-workers said she dismissed rules as obstacles to creativity. Earlier that day, she posted a clip of the drained fountain, describing it as a perfect backdrop that management had prevented her from using. By mid-afternoon, she returned with a tripod and tote bag. The fountain had been closed while a technician installed a temporary pump connected to power. Its metal housing sat inside the basin, awaiting a bonding screw that would complete the grounding, though from above it looked like ordinary maintenance equipment. Witnesses said Genevieve paced along the barrier, irritated that the fountain was empty. When a store employee warned the area was closed for electrical work, she insisted she only needed a moment and stepped over the caution tape anyway. Inside the basin, she unfolded the tripod and positioned it toward the skylight overhead. The stone floor was completely dry, which made the space look flat in the camera preview. Several shoppers recalled hearing her complain loudly that the lighting looked dead without water. A janitorial cart stood nearby with a cleaning bucket. Genevieve wheeled it toward a restroom and returned a few minutes later with it partially filled. She began pouring the water across the concrete floor, spreading it outward with the sole of her shoe to create a thin, reflective surface. The water flowed slowly toward the pump housing and collected along the lower edge of the basin. To avoid leaving visible footprints, she removed her shoes and stepped barefoot into the shallow water. Witnesses later said she appeared focused on adjusting the camera angle, repeatedly walking back and forth to check the reflection. At one point, she reached for the stainless steel railing along the edge of the basin to steady herself while repositioning the tripod. Witnesses later said her posture changed suddenly. Her shoulders lifted and her arms locked as she gripped the rail. The tripod tipped onto the wet concrete. There was no flash or loud sound, only the hum of the pump. Within seconds, she collapsed into the shallow water. A kiosk employee ran for help. Security arrived and saw her hand still against the metal railing. One guard used a wooden display board to push her arm away, while another shut off power at a nearby breaker panel. Emergency services were called around 3:20 p.m. Paramedics arrived within minutes and began CPR. She had no pulse and was not breathing. A defibrillator delivered shocks at the scene and during transport, but she was pronounced dead after about 30 minutes of resuscitation. Investigators later found small electrical burns on her palm and heel. The fountain pump had not been properly grounded, and the water layer created a conductive path when she touched the railing. The death was ruled ventricular fibrillation from electric shock. It was March 15, 2017, when Vanessa Clay's relentless need to dominate every interaction would finally catch up with her in the most horrific way imaginable. Vanessa, a 42-year-old pharmaceutical sales manager from Columbus, Ohio, had built her entire identity around intimidating service workers and demanding special treatment wherever she went. Standing 5 feet 6 inches tall with perfectly styled blonde hair, she carried herself with an air of superiority that made everyone around her uncomfortable. Her weapon of choice was her expensive Hermes scarf, which she wore like a badge of honor while berating minimum wage employees. That Tuesday afternoon, Vanessa had already terrorized 3 different establishments. She made a teenage Starbucks barista cry over Fomart, got a McDonald's employee written up for allegedly slow service, and screamed at a Target cashier for refusing her expired coupon. Each confrontation was live-streamed to her 5,000 social media followers who encouraged her toxic behavior. At Westfield Shopping Center, Vanessa arrived at the jewelry store demanding a $300 return without a receipt. When the clerk politely explained store policy, Vanessa exploded into her signature tirade, adjusting her designer scarf dramatically while filming the interaction. The young employee called security guard Marcus Williams, a 28-year-old father of 2 who had dealt with difficult customers before, but never anyone quite like Vanessa. As Vanessa descended the escalator, she spotted Marcus below and immediately began her assault. Leaning over the handrail while maintaining her live stream, she screamed about incompetent employees and threatened to have everyone fired. Her need to gesture dramatically while filming and carrying multiple shopping bags created a perfect storm of reckless behavior. The Hermes scarf that Vanessa used as her symbol of superiority began dancing in the air as she waved her arms aggressively. In her rage-fueled tunnel vision, she failed to notice the fabric drifting toward the escalator's side panel mechanism. The moving machinery caught the silk material and began pulling it tight around her neck. For 45 agonizing seconds, security cameras captured Vanessa clawing desperately at the scarf that was now strangling her. The same hands she had used moments before to point accusingly at employees were now fighting for her life. Other passengers screamed and frantically searched for the emergency stop button, but it was too late. The escalator's relentless mechanical force compressed Vanessa's cervical vertebrae while completely obstructing her airway. Her 140-pound frame went limp as the designer accessory she had worn to intimidate others became the instrument of her death. Emergency responders arrived 8 minutes later, but Vanessa Clay was already gone. The irony was not lost on anyone present. The woman who had spent years using her status symbols to terrorize service workers had been killed by the very scarf she wore to establish dominance. Her final live stream, still recording as paramedics worked, captured her last entitled demands before the fatal accident. Marcus Williams, the security guard she had been screaming at, required months of counseling to cope with watching someone die while cursing his name. The incident went viral, but instead of sympathy, millions of viewers mocked Vanessa's entitled behavior with comments like "Play Karen games, win Karen prizes." Vanessa's family attempted to sue them all, but security footage clearly showed her reckless behavior directly caused the accident. The case was dismissed, and Westfield implemented new safety protocols including loose clothing warnings and additional emergency stops on all escalators. The tragedy became a cautionary tale about how toxic entitlement can have deadly consequences, with Vanessa Clay's name becoming synonymous with the ultimate Karen karma. It was May 2019, Manchester, England, a public parking lot outside a retail complex on a busy Saturday afternoon. There were people moving through the area in both directions. It was the kind of place where small disputes happened and usually came to nothing. Donna Hale was 39. She worked as an administrative assistant and had a pattern of using physical confrontation to settle minor disagreements. She had slapped her ex-husband during an argument. She had done the same to a co-worker and to a family member on separate occasions. None of those incidents had resulted in serious consequences for her. Physical confrontation, in her experience, was something people backed down from. It had always ended there. That afternoon, she had been circling the lot for several minutes looking for a space. When one opened up near the entrance, she moved toward it and began reversing in. A man came from the opposite direction, pulled straight in from the front, and took it before she could complete the turn. He got out of his car, locked it, and walked toward the retail entrance without looking back. Donna got out and went after him. She caught up with him near the entrance and told him directly that she had been waiting for that space and that he had no right to take it. He did not respond. She told him he was not allowed to simply ignore her, that there were cameras in the lot and that she could report what he had done. He turned and tried to walk away. Donna positioned herself in front of him as if she had every right to stop him from leaving. He stopped, said nothing, and waited. Then he tried again. She blocked him a second time. A bystander nearby told her to leave it and let him go. Donna turned to the bystander and told him to mind his own business, that this had nothing to do with him. Then she turned back and kept going. What she did not know was that the man had recently been discharged from a psychiatric unit and was in the middle of adjusting his medication and treatment plan. He was not being passive out of weakness. He was actively working to stay disengaged. He had tried to remove himself from the situation more than once and had not been allowed to. He stood still, said nothing, and kept his reaction contained for as long as he could manage it. On his third attempt to pass her, she slapped him across the face. The slap was the trigger. Whatever regulation he had been maintaining collapsed in that moment. The response came immediately, and it was a single strike, but it landed with a force Donna had not anticipated and had no frame of reference for. She had done this before, and nothing serious had happened. This was not that. She went backward fast, and her head hit the pavement hard. She lost consciousness on impact and did not recover it at the scene. Witnesses moved in immediately. Someone called emergency services and others stayed with Donna until paramedics arrived. She was transported to hospital and admitted directly to intensive care. She was placed on a ventilator. A neurosurgeon performed emergency surgery to relieve the pressure that had built up inside her skull from the impact. The surgery bought time, but it did not change the outcome. Donna did not respond in the days that followed. She remained in a coma. Her family stayed with her. She did not regain consciousness. Donna Hale died from a traumatic brain injury caused by the fall. She was 39 years old. The man remained at the scene after the incident. He did not attempt to leave. He was taken into custody and later charged. Court proceedings included a full psychiatric evaluation. Medical evidence presented during the trial established that his capacity for self-regulation had been significantly compromised at the time of the incident as a direct result of his psychiatric condition and the disruption to his ongoing treatment. The jury accepted the evidence. The charge was reduced to manslaughter. He was not sentenced to a custodial term. A hospital order was imposed requiring him to remain under psychiatric supervision and continue treatment. It was October 3, 2015, in Albuquerque, New Mexico. A permitted film crew had locked down part of a warehouse district to shoot a car rollover stunt. Off-duty police controlled traffic, and a clearly marked hot zone was set inside barricades and cones. Tammy Atkins, 31, was a substitute teacher in Albuquerque. A week of film-related road closures had forced long detours, making her late to 2 assignments and costing her a day's pay. She complained online that the production was treating the city as if it had priority over residents and argued that the closures had not been properly communicated. Known among friends for confronting businesses over perceived rule violations, she convinced herself the production lacked proper authority. That afternoon, determined to expose what she believed was an unauthorized shutdown, she drove to the site with her phone ready to record. Orange water-filled barriers, traffic cones, and road closure signs marked the restricted block. The stunt corridor extended about 120 feet, with a coned safety buffer for the rollover arc. After 2 reduced-speed rehearsal passes, the coordinator initiated full lockup, halting all pedestrian and vehicle movement before the full-speed attempt. Around 2 p.m., Tammy approached a production assistant and demanded to know why she was being prevented from using the public street. As he began explaining the permitted closure, she interrupted and insisted on speaking with a supervisor. She began filming, stating loudly that taxpayer money was being wasted. An off-duty officer instructed her to remain behind the barricades. Tammy replied that she knew her rights and argued she could stand on any public sidewalk she chose. As final preparations began, the first assistant director initiated the final lockup procedure. Production assistants radioed in that traffic was halted at each control point. The stunt coordinator conducted a deliberate walkthrough of the vehicle path and the extended safety buffer. At that moment, the zone was visibly clear. Tammy stood outside the cones near the sidewalk, still recording. After the sweep, the coordinator returned to position and signaled that the set was secure. The stunt driver began the approach at the committed speed. As attention shifted downrange toward the oncoming vehicle, Tammy moved along the outer barricade line to improve her angle. Earlier in the afternoon, the temporary opening had been secured with interlocked steel barricades and weighted bases. However, Tammy slipped past during a brief moment when a PA was repositioning to confirm lockup at another post. Believing she was still outside the primary vehicle path, Tammy moved past the lighter barricade section and stepped just inside the clearly marked safety buffer, raising her phone higher. She crossed the boundary moments before the vehicle reached the ramp. According to investigators, the driver had already committed to the approach speed, making sudden braking unsafe. The driver hit the ramp at the designated speed and triggered the engineered rollover system. The vehicle flipped along its tested arc. As it rotated, the vehicle's rollover arc extended to the outer edge of the established safety buffer, where Tammy had positioned herself. She was struck and thrown to the pavement as the vehicle completed its roll and came to rest on its side several yards away. Crew members and the on-set medic reached her within seconds. Filming stopped immediately, and emergency procedures were initiated. She was unresponsive with severe head trauma and multiple fractures. She was transported by the staged ambulance within minutes to a nearby hospital. Imaging revealed a catastrophic traumatic brain injury. Emergency surgery was performed that evening to relieve intracranial pressure. She did not regain consciousness and died 2 days later from complications related to the injury. Investigators later determined that the temporary barricade opening had not been continuously secured during the stunt, creating an unauthorized breach in the safety perimeter. The production company was cited for failing to maintain barrier integrity during high-risk operations. Civil litigation followed and production was suspended. It was January 18, 2013, at Alta, Utah, near a ski boundary that had been closed overnight after heavy snowfall. Fresh snow lay deep and quiet. Warning signs were posted, gates were locked, and ski patrol was active along the line. The slope looked calm from below, but the snowpack was unstable and waiting for a trigger. Kara Mullen was 41 and worked as a residential real estate agent in Salt Lake City. She sold mid-range homes and regularly filmed short videos to promote listings and herself. Ski trips were part of that image. She posted often, tracked views and comments, and treated public spaces as places where confidence and persistence usually got results. People who knew her described her as direct, impatient, and unwilling to accept restrictions. Kara skied often, but only within resort systems, using rented gear and relying on patrol to manage hazards. Alta's terrain naturally funnels wind-blown snow into bowls and narrow gullies. After storms, layers of snow can rest on weak surfaces and fail suddenly. Patrol manages this risk with closures and controlled releases, but the system depends on skiers staying out of closed areas. That morning followed a night of heavy snow and strong winds that loaded the slope above the boundary. Patrol closed the gate for avalanche control and posted warnings explaining the risk. Kara arrived with two acquaintances, stopped near the rope line, and began filming. She confronted patrol, arguing that her lift ticket gave her access and dismissing the danger despite posted ratings and morning safety notices. Patrol told her a release would be triggered upslope and asked her to move back. Kara continued recording, raised her voice, and pointed her skis downhill. When told again to step away, she ducked under the rope and slid several yards into the closed area, still shouting toward the gate as nearby skiers stopped and watched. Minutes later, patrol followed standard procedures to clear the hazard. The timing was routine for post-storm conditions. Kara was still inside the boundary, moving slowly across the slope with her camera out, ignoring shouted warnings from both above and below, while the snow remained stiff, connected, and ready to break. A crack raced across the slope in a straight line, and a single slab broke free. Dense snow began moving downhill at once. Kara tried to turn, but the slab caught her skis, twisted her legs sideways, and dropped her onto her back. She was carried immediately, rolled as the slide thickened, and pushed toward a narrow gully. She was slammed into a buried rock, crushing her ribs and shoulder, and her helmet split on impact. The moving snow packed around her chest and face, locking her in place. The pressure prevented her lungs from expanding, one arm pinned beneath her body, and within seconds she stopped moving as the debris settled hard around her. Other skiers saw the fracture and contacted patrol immediately. Responders reached the site within minutes, guided by fresh tracks and the last place she had been seen. They cleared her face and airway, but she was not breathing. CPR was started after she was pulled free, but her chest could not rise due to injuries and compression. The medical examiner later reported death from traumatic asphyxia combined with blunt injuries. In simple terms, the packed snow prevented her from breathing, and broken ribs and bruised lungs made survival impossible. Death occurred before rescue efforts could restore breathing. After the incident, patrol installed a solid barricade at that boundary during avalanche control periods. It was March 18, 2016. At a mid-sized gym in Tempe, Arizona, the evening crowd moved between racks as members filmed lifts with phones balanced on benches and bottles. Staff wiped chalk from barbells while workouts continued as usual, until a brief argument over a camera angle turned a loaded barbell into a disaster. After weeks of stalled progress, Tessa Rowe, 35, arrived straight from her shift at a dental office near campus. Her day had been spent answering insurance calls and managing appointment schedules. The gym was where she tried to prove something different about herself. She ran a small fitness page with about 4,000 followers. Her best confirmed squat was 255 pounds, but both her progress and attention online had slowed. That evening, she planned to film a heavier attempt at 275 pounds. The gym floor was crowded, yet she chose a rack beside the water fountain where lighting was brighter. She placed a tripod in the walkway in front of the rack despite earlier reminders from staff about keeping the path clear. She adjusted the camera several times and rechecked the plates to frame the shot. The rack's safety arms were set unusually low, leaving little margin if the bar shifted forward. At 7:42 p.m., she stepped under the bar and unracked the weight. As she descended into the squat, a teenage member walked behind the rack toward the fountain. His movement briefly crossed the edge of her camera frame. Tessa noticed it in the mirror. Instead of focusing on the lift, she rushed the ascent and pushed the bar back toward the rack. The bar struck the J-hooks with a loud metal crack. The right side settled correctly, but the left side landed slightly forward, resting on the lip rather than fully inside the hook. Tessa stepped away from the bar and immediately turned toward the teenager, pointing toward the walkway and complaining that people kept walking through her filming setup. Witnesses later said she focused on the tripod and camera framing rather than the bar behind her. The teenager apologized and stepped aside, but she continued arguing for several seconds about people crossing through the shot. Without checking the bar, she stepped back under it to recenter the bar before attempting the lift. As she lifted it from the rack, the left sleeve slipped off the lip of the hook first, twisting the bar sharply across her shoulders. Instead of dumping the bar backward, a common escape during a failed squat, she stepped forward in an attempt to stabilize it. The tripod stood directly in front of the rack, and witnesses later said she appeared to be trying to avoid dropping the bar onto the camera. As she tried to stabilize the weight, the uneven load rolled toward the base of her neck, her chin tucked instinctively as the bar drove downward through her flexed cervical spine, and her knees folded beneath her. Witnesses heard the bar scrape and crash as she collapsed onto the safety arms. A member nearby called 911 at 7:44 p.m. Staff reached her within about a minute, removed the plates, and lifted the bar clear before starting CPR. Paramedics arrived about 6 minutes later, but resuscitation efforts were unsuccessful, and she was pronounced dead at the scene. The medical examiner later found a fracture dislocation between the second and third cervical vertebrae, with a complete spinal cord tear caused by the bar's downward force. Her death was ruled an accidental blunt force injury during weightlifting. Security footage and her phone recording showed the bar's left side resting improperly in the rack for nearly 20 seconds before she stepped back under it for the second attempt. After the incident, the gym replaced worn J-hooks and tightened rules on tripods and filming equipment near active racks. It was August 3, 2018, when Jillian Frost's corporate entitlement would send her plummeting to her death in a Denver parking garage. Jillian, a 38-year-old HR director standing 5 feet 4 inches tall, had spent her career wielding power over employees like a weapon. She drove a pristine white BMW SUV that she used to intimidate anyone she deemed beneath her social status, always carrying business cards listing her corporate title to establish dominance over service workers. That Tuesday morning had already been a disaster for Jillian. After being denied a promotion she felt entitled to, she embarked on a revenge shopping spree to soothe her wounded ego. She had already screamed at a gas station attendant over pump speed, demanded a Subway manager fire an employee over sandwich assembly, and posted Instagram stories mocking what she called incompetent minimum wage workers. At the Target parking garage, Jillian's entitled rage reached a boiling point. She spent 20 minutes aggressively honking at families and elderly shoppers while filming them through her windshield. Her social media followers ate up her content titled "Teaching Parking Lot Etiquette to Peasants," encouraging her increasingly toxic behavior. When Jillian spotted the Martinez family loading groceries, she immediately pulled behind them and began laying on her horn. The family included 78-year-old grandmother Maria Martinez, who moved slowly with her walker due to arthritis. This fueled Jillian's impatience as she filmed while screaming about important people having jobs to get to. Unable to contain her corporate Karen rage, Jillian exploded from her vehicle like a woman possessed. She began her signature intimidation routine, stepping backward onto the concrete safety barrier to gain height advantage while filming and threatening to have the entire family arrested for obstruction. The 42-inch concrete barrier had been weakened by recent construction work, though it appeared solid. As Jillian gestured wildly while maintaining her confrontational stance, the compromised structure couldn't support her aggressive movements. Her 135-pound frame, combined with violent gesturing, caused the barrier to give way completely. Jillian plummeted 35 feet headfirst onto the asphalt below, her designer heels flying off during the fall. The impact was devastating. Her skull fractured in multiple places while her spine severed at the C2 vertebrae. Brain matter scattered across the pavement as her body went into immediate cardiac arrest. The Martinez family watched in horror as the woman terrorizing them just seconds before lay motionless in a growing pool of blood. Maria Martinez, despite being the target of Jillian's final tirade, called 911 with shaking hands. Paramedics arrived within 6 minutes, but Jillian was gone. Her phone, still clutched in her death grip, contained the final video of her entitled behavior causing her demise, showing her stepping onto the barrier while screaming threats before capturing her fatal fall. The parking garage was immediately closed for inspection, revealing multiple safety violations. Target faced a $2.3 million OSHA fine, though reduced when investigators determined Jillian's reckless behavior contributed significantly to the barrier failure. Online reactions were overwhelmingly unsympathetic. Comments flooded social media with phrases like, "She literally died mad about a parking space," and "Corporate Karen meets concrete reality." Her employer quietly restructured their HR department. After her history of workplace bullying emerged during the investigation, the Martinez family, traumatized by witnessing the death, received counseling and a settlement. Grandmother Maria developed severe anxiety about public spaces, forever haunted by being someone's final victim before their demise. Gillian Frost's death became a cautionary tale, proving that gravity doesn't care about your corporate title or entitled attitude. It was November 3, 2017, Surrey, British Columbia, Canada, an upscale retail store on one of the busier shopping streets in the city. The store had received a new full-height plate glass entrance door earlier that morning. It had been installed, cleaned, and left unmarked. From either side, it was completely transparent. Angela Whitmore was 38. She worked as a real estate consultant and carried herself in a way that made that clear in any room she entered. Appearance was not just a preference for her. It was a professional tool and a personal standard she applied to everything around her. She was known among staff at the stores she frequented as someone who expected a great deal and said so directly when those expectations were not met. Her personal assistant had resigned earlier that same day, the 10th person to leave that role in under 6 months. Each had described the same pattern. She called at odd hours, set impossible deadlines, and allowed no recovery time between tasks. When work was not completed to her satisfaction, she described the person as incompetent and unable to match her standards. She had gone through 10 assistants without adjusting her expectations once. Angela had come to the store alone that afternoon. The reason for the visit was specific. She had been informed she would be receiving a community contribution award and had decided the occasion required a new outfit. She arrived wearing a fitted two-piece suit and high stiletto heels, walked through the entrance, and went directly to the floor to begin selecting. She chose 16 items and moved to the fitting room. She informed staff that she was a VIP customer and expected priority treatment consistent with that status, and that the fitting room should be held for her exclusive use for as long as she needed it. When a staff member explained that the rooms were shared and other customers were waiting, Angela told her that she clearly did not understand who she was dealing with and that she expected the matter to be handled appropriately. Several other customers who arrived and waited for a room to become available eventually left without being served. During the approximately 70 minutes she occupied the room, she called staff in repeatedly, left items on the floor, and when one staff member suggested she was taking longer than expected, Angela told her she would leave when she was ready and not a moment before. While trying on one of the items, a new arrival that had come into the store that same morning and was among the most expensive pieces on the floor, the garment was damaged. Staff informed Angela that she would be required to pay for it regardless of whether she chose to take it with her. Angela looked at the staff member and told her she was out of her mind. She said she had no intention of paying for something she did not want and that she found it offensive to even be asked. She demanded to see the manager. The manager confirmed the store's position. The item had been damaged while in Angela's care and payment was required. Angela told the manager she was clearly not qualified for the role she was in. She said she was a well-known figure in the community, that she was wealthy, and that people like the manager should think carefully before deciding who they wanted to make an enemy of. She told her she would be on the phone to the corporate office before she reached the car park, and that both the manager and every staff member involved would answer for how she had been treated. When the manager held her position, Angela called her a wretch, told the staff around her they were an embarrassment to the industry, and said she hoped none of them planned to stay in retail long because they clearly had no future in it. No one responded. Angela turned and walked toward the exit. The manager called after her and told her to slow down on the tiled floor in those heels. Angela did not turn around. She did not acknowledge it. She pulled out her phone and began composing a formal complaint, her eyes fixed on the screen from the moment she started moving. The stiletto heels kept her stance narrow and gave her limited margin for any sudden shift in balance. The plate glass door was directly ahead of her, fully closed, completely transparent, and lacked the visibility markings required under applicable safety standards. She did not look up. Her upper body struck the glass at walking pace. The impact stopped her forward motion abruptly and sent a brief recoil through her body. She lost balance as her weight shifted backward, likely compounded by the narrow heel base. Her hands were occupied, one holding the phone, the other gripping her bag, and neither came free in time to break the fall. She went down backward and the back of her head impacted the tiled floor. She was briefly responsive in the seconds after the fall, speaking in fragmented words to staff who reached her immediately. Her condition deteriorated rapidly. Emergency services were contacted and she was transported for medical care. Despite medical intervention, she did not survive her injuries. Angela Whitmore was pronounced dead from traumatic brain injury, resulting from intracranial bleeding caused by the fall. She was 38 years old. Post-incident findings confirmed the plate glass door lacked the visibility markings required under applicable safety standards at the time of installation. The store was cited for the compliance violation. Corrective markings were applied to all glass entry points within the store before it reopened. It was September 9, 2017, in Phoenix, Arizona, and the afternoon heat had climbed to 106 degrees. The desert air shimmered above the concrete, and waves of heat rose visibly from the tarmac beyond the terminal windows. Susan Cho was 47 years old and worked as a regional sales director for a logistics company based in the city. Her role required frequent travel, and colleagues described her as highly detail-oriented and quick to challenge policies she believed were inefficient. She flew often and was accustomed to navigating airline procedures herself. When her checked suitcase failed to appear at baggage claim, her irritation escalated almost immediately. She stated loudly that she had watched the bag being loaded and criticized the staff's handling of the situation as unacceptable. Within minutes, she demanded a supervisor, repeating that she traveled constantly and believed she understood how airline systems worked. She began recording the staff on her phone, continuing to film the interaction. The airport's largest terminal handled the majority of daily traffic. Access doors leading from the concourse to the ramp were clearly marked for authorized personnel only and fitted with local alarm systems tied to security monitoring. Staff informed Susan that her bag had been misrouted and would arrive on the next inbound flight later that afternoon. They offered complimentary delivery to her home. She rejected the explanation, stating that she did not believe them. Convinced the airline was lying to her, she said she would go look for it herself and abruptly walked toward a marked service door reading, "Authorized personnel only. Alarm will sound." Without hesitation, she pushed through the bar. The alarm activated immediately, triggering both a local siren and an automatic notification to airport security dispatch. Although the door had experienced intermittent wiring faults earlier in the week, the alert was transmitted in real time, and a response unit was dispatched within seconds. Susan descended the exterior metal staircase and stepped onto the active ramp. The heat radiating from the pavement was intense, and the noise level was high. Jet engines idled in the distance. Several crew members noticed her immediately, radioed the breach to operations, and began shouting and signaling forcefully for her to stop and return to the building. Instead of stopping, she waved them off and continued forward, holding her phone out as if recording the scene. At the same time, a regional jet had just begun taxiing from a gate at approximately 10 miles per hour, following the painted taxi center line. The cockpit crew observed a person entering the taxi path and immediately applied maximum braking. Although the aircraft was moving slowly, she entered the taxi path at close range, leaving insufficient stopping distance even after maximum braking was applied. Then the nose landing gear struck her. Emergency responders arrived within minutes and secured the area. She was transported to a local trauma center with severe lower body trauma, pelvic fractures, and significant internal bleeding. She underwent emergency surgery, but developed complications from traumatic shock and massive blood loss. Despite intensive care, she died 2 days later. The affected taxi lane and adjacent ramp area were closed for several hours pending investigation. This prompted a comprehensive review of ramp access procedures. The airport later reviewed its access protocols and reinforced staffing procedures at service doors during peak hours, emphasizing rapid physical response to any future unauthorized ramp entry. It was July 22nd, 2018, on the Ocoee River in southeastern Tennessee, where scheduled summer releases had pushed cold water into fast, narrow channels. Commercial rafting trips were moving through in close succession, and while the river looked manageable from shore, strong recirculating currents were already forming around exposed rocks beneath the surface. Nina Harrow was 31 and worked as a retail shift supervisor at a home goods chain in Chattanooga. She was dependable, often covered extra shifts, and had begun posting frequently about assertiveness and taking control in everyday situations. Her posts were aimed at coworkers and friends, and focused on correcting others and stepping in when she felt direction was weak. She had no formal outdoor or river experience and relied mostly on general fitness and confidence rather than technical skill. She signed up for the rafting trip with coworkers as a group activity. The Ocoee was running controlled releases that day, higher and colder than normal, with several Class 3 and 4 rapids. The commercial section contained known hazard points, including mid-river boulders that created hydraulics capable of holding swimmers underwater. Guides depended on strict paddle commands, synchronized movement, and keeping all passengers seated low in the raft, because standing removed stability and control during rapid entry. At the launch point, the guide gave a standard safety briefing that covered paddle commands, body position, and the requirement to remain seated through rapids with feet tucked inside the raft. Nina interrupted more than once, making jokes about guides exaggerating danger and saying balance mattered more than following instructions exactly. The guide corrected her and continued, reminding the group that the rules applied to everyone. As the raft approached a known rapid with a lateral wave feeding into a downstream boulder, the guide called for a coordinated forward paddle to maintain alignment. Nina argued that a different angle would be better, and raised her voice over the sound of the water. As the raft entered the rapid slightly offline, she shifted her weight outward and stood on the outer tube with her arms spread, attempting to demonstrate stability. The lateral wave struck the upstream side of the raft, causing it to pitch and roll. With her weight elevated, Nina was thrown off first and hit the water near the downstream edge. The current immediately carried her toward the boulder, where water folded back on itself into a hydraulic that pulled her sideways and down. Video from a trailing raft and the guide's action camera showed her head breaking the surface briefly before being pulled under again. During one cycle, her chest struck the rock edge, forcing the air from her lungs. She surfaced for a moment, gasping, then was pulled back into the recirculating water. The guide threw a rope that brushed her arm but did not catch. A second throw landed closer, but the current dragged her under before she could grab it securely. After several cycles, 2 guides entered the water with ropes and used positioning to disrupt the hydraulic and pull her free into an eddy. She was unresponsive, with bluish skin and no effective breathing. CPR began immediately on shore while emergency services were called. Paramedics arrived approximately 12 minutes later and took over care, but she did not regain a pulse or spontaneous breathing. The medical examiner listed drowning as the primary cause of death, with contributing blunt trauma. Her lungs were bruised, several ribs were fractured, and deep chest contusions were present from repeated impacts against rock. In plain terms, she was held underwater repeatedly and struck hard enough to prevent breathing or effective movement. The incident was documented by guide footage and bystander video, which showed the sequence clearly from the moment she stood up to the rescue attempt. The outfitter reviewed procedures afterward and reinforced briefings about staying seated in rapids. Nina's workplace later organized a small safety fundraiser for regional water rescue training, presented as a reminder that ignoring instructions in hazardous environments can have immediate consequences. It was August 12th, 2017. The Oklahoma heat lingered over the Tulsa fairgrounds as thousands packed in for the final night of a 3-day rock festival. By dusk, side entrances were locked and perimeter patrols tightened. Security presence increased quietly along the outer walls. Standing near a restricted viewing lane was Brenda Harlow, 41. She ran a small lifestyle blog centered on upgrades, shortcuts, and getting closer to spaces most people were not allowed into. Her readership was modest but steady, During the week, she worked as a regional sales representative for a cosmetics distributor across Oklahoma and Arkansas. Online, she projected confidence and connections. In person, she had a habit of pushing hard when told no. Traffic to her blog had declined in recent months, and sponsorships slowed. She began treating live events as chances to capture angles other bloggers could not. She even printed imitation badges, believing confidence in appearance could bypass most security barriers. That evening, she arrived with a general admission ticket and a homemade badge clipped to her blouse. At the side stage checkpoint, security scanned it and rejected it immediately, explaining the platform was restricted to credentialed media. Brenda insisted they were mistaken and claimed she had already been cleared to film. She pointed toward the stage and argued her audience expected backstage coverage. When asked to step aside, she leaned past the barrier rope and demanded a supervisor, accusing the guard of preventing her from accessing the platform before finally walking away as nearby attendees watched. The elevated media platform remained restricted, and several signs along the perimeter wall warned visitors not to climb it. The only clear view outside the restricted area came from a 9-foot masonry wall separating the public walkway from an internal production lane. The wall was topped with narrow iron finials, spaced a few inches apart. Dust from heavy foot traffic coated the capstone. 2 security guards rotated through that section at regular intervals. Earlier that night, her phone contained a short clip showing the stage from ground level and her frustration about blocked views. At 9:16 p.m., according to perimeter timestamps, Brenda began climbing the wall, using mortar seams as footholds. A guard approaching from the walkway signaled for her to come down. Instead, she continued upward, pausing briefly near the top before pulling herself onto the capstone. By 9:18 p.m., she had swung one leg over the wall and was balancing between the iron finials when a pyrotechnic cue detonated from the stage, roughly 60 yards away. The blast echoed along the masonry as she turned toward the sound, and while shifting her weight backward, her right foot slid on loose dust covering the capstone, causing her to lose balance and fall. She fell onto the iron finials below. One pointed finial entered her lower abdomen above the right hip and stopped against the pelvic bone. The impact pitched her forward before gravity pulled her free. Witnesses heard a sharp metallic strike before she collapsed onto the concrete walkway, where blood quickly spread through her clothing. A nearby vendor called emergency services while security alerted on-site medics, who reached her within minutes and attempted to control the bleeding. Paramedics arrived at 9:24 p.m. and transported her as resuscitation efforts continued. At the hospital, surgeons determined the iron finial had severed the right iliac artery. Despite transfusions and emergency surgery, she went into cardiac arrest from blood loss and could not be revived. The death was ruled hemorrhagic shock caused by penetrating trauma. In the following months, festival organizers replaced the pointed finials along the wall with rounded caps and increased perimeter patrols to prevent similar incidents. It was September 8, 2018, when Danica Wells' road rage obsession would send her SUV flipping through the air at 75 miles per hour on Interstate 75 in Atlanta, Georgia. Danica, a 41-year-old corporate compliance officer standing 5 feet 6 inches tall, had weaponized her enforcement authority into a personal crusade against anyone who challenged her rules. Her black SUV was equipped with dash cams, custom horns, and compliance officer decals that justified her highway vigilante behavior. Danica specialized in policing other drivers like subordinates, having received 3 citations for aggressive driving while filming motorists for violations. Her LinkedIn showcased posts about holding people accountable and teaching respect to insubordinate individuals. That Friday morning had been productive for Danica's power complex. She had fired 2 employees, posted rants about teaching respect to workers, and was taking prescription stimulants without medical supervision, amplifying her aggressive personality. Danica's signature highway intimidation involved pulling alongside vehicles to scream at drivers while maintaining high speeds, using her corporate authority to justify dangerous confrontations. She believed her compliance position gave her jurisdiction over every driver. When a compact Honda merged in front of her SUV during rush hour, Danica launched into her highway tirade. She began aggressively tailgating while honking and flashing high beams, filming the alleged violation for social media content. Unable to contain her enforcement obsession, Danica pulled alongside the Honda at 75 miles per hour and began screaming through her window about proper merging procedures. She swerved dangerously close while gesturing wildly, trying to force them off the road. Danica's need to maintain her confrontational filming stance created tunnel vision. She became consumed with punishing the other driver, focusing entirely on her power trip rather than highway safety. Traffic ahead had stopped for construction work, with orange cones and concrete barriers clearly visible. But Danica was too obsessed with her enforcement performance to notice the dangerous situation developing. Maintaining 75 miles per hour while screaming about teaching driving lessons, Danica's SUV struck the concrete construction barrier with devastating force. The impact launched her 4,000-pound vehicle into the air, causing it to flip 3 times before crashing upside down. Danica's body was thrown around the interior during the violent flipping sequence. Her spine severed at multiple points while her skull fractured against the roof. Internal organs ruptured from deceleration forces as twisted metal crushed her 140-pound frame. Emergency responders found Danica's SUV destroyed and her body lifeless in the wreckage. Her dashcam footage captured every moment of her final road rage incident, showing her aggressive behavior directly causing the fatal crash. The driver she had been harassing provided witness testimony describing Danica's escalating aggression. Despite being traumatized by witnessing her death, they required counseling for survivor's guilt. Danica's dashcam footage went viral when released by authorities, showing her screaming threats while ignoring traffic safety. Online reactions were unsympathetic, with comments like "Compliance Karen couldn't comply with driving laws" flooding social media. Her employer faced scrutiny when Danica's history of abusing authority emerged. The company implemented mandatory anger management training for compliance officers and reformed enforcement policies. Danica Wells died trying to enforce rules on others while ignoring them herself, proving concrete barriers don't care about corporate authority. It was January 21st, 2018, Gold Coast, Queensland, Australia, an amusement park on a busy summer morning. The roller coaster used a standard chain lift system with lap bar restraints. It was one of the most popular rides in the park and had run without serious incident for years. Vanessa Clark was 36. She worked as an event planner and cared deeply about how she appeared to others. Her social media was carefully maintained, and she treated every outing as a chance to capture herself in the right light. She had recently finalized a divorce and chose to spend the day at the park alone to mark the occasion. She arrived expecting everything to go exactly as she had planned. Her behavior towards staff started at the first ride. The queue was long, and she asked to be moved to the front. She said she had paid for a full-day ticket and did not see why she should be treated the same as everyone else in line. When the staff declined, she asked for a supervisor. The supervisor gave the same answer. She criticized the system, saying other parks handled it better, then walked away, still talking. At the roller coaster, signs at the entrance clearly prohibited selfie sticks and loose items. The ride operator repeated the rules out loud before boarding. Hands inside, stay properly seated, keep the lap bar down at all times. When asked to store her bag, Vanessa brushed it off. Confident she already knew how rides like this worked, she stored the bag but kept a small, collapsible selfie stick concealed along her side, out of the operator's direct view as she took her seat. When the operator moved along the car to check restraints, he performed a quick visual pass, confirming each bar appeared locked without applying additional pressure. Vanessa pulled the lap bar down once until it clicked and gave a brief nod before he reached her fully. The bar sat lower than ideal, leaving space between it and her thighs, but it appeared secured at a glance. A tighter position would have restricted her movement, so she left it as it was, and the operator continued down the row. She treated the instructions as unnecessary and focused on getting the photo. As the coaster climbed the chain lift hill, she pulled out the selfie stick and extended it. She leaned forward over her knees and lifted her hips off the seat to frame the shot. As her hips rose, her thighs slid backward and down along the seat, creating clearance beneath the lap bar until it was no longer making contact with her legs. The bar stayed in position. Her body had moved away from it. She was no longer secured by the restraint. She braced against the footrest and pushed forward, shifting her center of mass toward the front of the car as the train approached the crest. As the train crested, her weight reduced against the seat, removing the last resistance keeping her in position. The nose of the car tipped down sharply into the descent. The forward rotation her own push had already started, combined with the pitch of the drop. The lap bar was at her midsection, and her legs were no longer behind it. As the train tipped over the crest and began its descent, she was carried forward over the bar and out of the car. The coaster finished its run and stopped at the end of the circuit. Passengers got off and told staff what they had seen during the ride. Park staff responded immediately, and emergency services were called. Vanessa Clark was found on the ground below the track at the point where the descent began. She was alive, but unresponsive. Paramedics stabilized her at the scene, and she was transported to hospital where she underwent emergency surgery. She did not regain consciousness. Vanessa Clark was pronounced dead 18 hours later from traumatic brain injury and internal bleeding consistent with the fall. Investigators determined that Vanessa had deliberately left the bar with slack and had not followed repeated safety instructions given before departure. The park introduced mandatory lap bar checks before departure and tightened its loose item policy across all major attractions. It was June 7, 2014. In Portland, Oregon. The Saturday farmers market stretched across several downtown blocks, drawing steady mid-morning crowds between 8 and 2. Brenda Holloway, 36, was a Portland real estate agent known among colleagues for being assertive and meticulous in negotiations. Friends later described her as persistent in conflicts once she believed she had been treated unfairly. A week earlier, she had purchased a jar of raw honey from the beekeeper and became convinced it had been diluted. She called him twice, demanding an explanation. He told her raw honey can crystallize or vary in texture depending on temperature and floral source. Brenda felt dismissed. That morning, she decided to confront him publicly and demand a refund and apology in person. She arrived around 10:15 a.m. and approached the booth immediately, raising her voice before the beekeeper could finish greeting her. Nearby customers turned as she loudly accused him of selling inferior products and misleading buyers. The beekeeper responded calmly, again offering a refund. Brenda refused to lower her voice and insisted she would not accept being dismissed as a customer. She demanded an apology and threatened to report him to market organizers. The beekeeper's display included 2 tables of products and positioned several feet behind the main customer area, a sealed observation hive used for demonstrations. The hive was enclosed in a wooden frame with clear panels, ventilated through screened sections, and secured with screws and 2 exterior latches. A printed sign at eye level read, "Do not touch, live bees." The unit sat on a small wheeled cart with locked wheels. As the exchange intensified, the beekeeper stepped back behind his table to create distance. Brenda followed, saying she had every right to stand wherever she wanted since she had paid for his product. In doing so, she crossed the customer boundary and backed into the cart holding the observation hive. The impact shifted the cart. One wheel rolled slightly off the uneven pavement edge, causing the hive to tilt and strike the ground on one corner. The fall split the wooden corner joint, snapping one latch and creating a visible opening along the panel edge. The vibration agitated the bees inside. Within seconds, several guard bees exited through the opening. Brenda, standing closest to the hive, was stung on the neck and forearms. As she swatted and turned, more stings followed near her hairline and jaw. She stumbled backward, tripped over a folding chair, and fell. The beekeeper immediately covered the hive with a thick canvas cloth to reduce light and limit further escape, while bystanders moved away. Within a minute, Brenda showed signs of a severe allergic reaction. Paramedics later learned she had a documented bee sting allergy, but she was not carrying an epinephrine auto-injector that morning. Emergency services were called. Paramedics arrived within minutes, pushing through the crowded walkway. Brenda was struggling to breathe and showing signs of dangerously low blood pressure. Intramuscular epinephrine was administered, and she was transported to a nearby hospital. Shortly after arrival, she went into cardiac arrest due to delayed epinephrine. Despite resuscitation efforts, she was pronounced dead later that morning. The medical examiner ruled the cause of death as anaphylaxis triggered by multiple bee stings. The market closed for the remainder of the day. No criminal charges were filed. In the following season, organizers updated spacing requirements and required physical barriers for vendors displaying live insects or animals. It was June 14, 2014, in Sandusky, Ohio. at a lakeside theme park where concrete held heat and the air carried sunscreen and fryer oil. Lines moved slowly, operators repeated safety rules, and phones stayed raised as people waited. Near the entrance of a rotating ride, a boundary meant to keep people out of moving parts was crossed. Mallory Keene, 36, worked as an office administrator for a shipping firm in Elyria. Her job involved invoices, mileage logs, and enforcing written policies with vendors. Outside of work, she maintained a small consumer rights blog that focused on refunds, towing disputes, and complaint procedures. She often documented disagreements and kept copies of posted rules. She organized the trip for her sister and 2 nieces and tracked costs closely. Earlier that day, a wristband issue at a food counter turned into a recorded argument. After that exchange, she continued filming interactions with staff. The afternoon heat and crowd noise increased as they reached a spinning flat ride with a rotating entry platform and a moving gate. Once restraint checks began, the gate closed and re-entry was not allowed. The design relied on keeping guests out of the sweep zone, the narrow area where the rotating platform passed close to fixed supports. A phone charm slipped from Mallory's case and slid near the edge of the entry area. She stepped out to retrieve it as the ride cycle started. When she tried to step back in, the attendant blocked her and pointed to the sign explaining re-entry was prohibited. Mallory raised her phone and recorded the operator and the moving platform. The line behind her tightened, and nearby guests asked her to move back. The operator signaled for her to step away from the entrance. Instead, Mallory climbed a waist-high queue barrier and dropped into the restricted area while continuing to film. Her feet landed inches from the moving deck. Several guests shouted for her to stop, and a fixed camera captured the moment she crossed the barrier. She placed one foot onto the rotating platform as if it were stationary. Dust and grit on the metal made it slick. Her shoe slid while her other foot caught the lip, twisting her hips. She pitched forward and the moving deck caught her shorts and thigh, pulling her into the narrow gap where the rotating platform met the base. Witnesses later described her fingers briefly hooking a railing before the pull wrenched her shoulder and broke her grip. Her hip struck the edge, and her upper legs were drawn into the tightening space. The platform continued to rotate until the emergency stop fully engaged, compressing her pelvis and thighs against a fixed support. Blood pooled beneath the ride's skirt. The operator activated the emergency stop and cleared the area. Emergency services were called from the booth. Park security arrived within minutes and began first aid while moving the crowd back. Sandusky Fire and EMS reached the ride about 7 minutes after the call and were guided through the walkway by staff. CCTV and multiple phone videos later confirmed her entry into the sweep zone during motion. The coroner documented massive crush injuries. In plain terms, her pelvis was shattered and major blood vessels in the groin were torn, causing rapid internal and external bleeding. Both legs were traumatically amputated by crushing and shear forces at the gap. The cause of death was catastrophic blood loss with severe blunt force trauma. Investigators reviewed camera footage, operator logs, and witness statements and found no mechanical defect. The sequence began with unauthorized entry into a restricted area while the ride was moving. The park added additional barrier panels, high-contrast floor markings, and larger warning signs at the queue. The case was closed as an accidental death caused by entering a restricted ride area.